Ahoy there! Think life at sea during the Age of Discovery was all heroic explorers, salty breezes, and epic sunsets? Think again. Tonight, I'm spilling 33 of the dumbest, weirdest, and downright absurd realities that sailors actually lived through. From wind-in-a-bag scams and rooster tattoos to drunken chickens and enema bellows. This isn't just history. It's a masterclass in bad decisions, questionable hygiene, and creative superstition. So grab your grog, steady your stomach, and let's set sail into the weirdest corner of maritime history. 1. So you're the new guy on the ship, fresh off the farm, and you're about to cross the equator. You think maybe you'll get a high five, a hearty handshake? No. You get dragged into a mandatory corporate retreat from hell, run by King Neptune, who's just the ship's grimiest dude with a dead jellyfish on his head. His onboarding process involves his pals holding you down while he gives you a close shave with a rusty barrel hoop that has seen more action than a port town prostitute. Then, for the team-building exercise, they baptize you by repeatedly power dunking your head into a barrel of what is essentially the ship's forgotten science projects. It's a warm, chunky smoothie of seawater, old food, and everyone's recycled rum from the night before. It's not a rite of passage, it's a biological attack. 2. You think NFTs are a dumb investment? Let me introduce you to their spiritual ancestor, wind in a bag. Yes, back in port, con artists with the greasy charm of a televangelist would literally sell bags of air. They'd do this whole theatrical dance, catch a breeze in a canvas sack, and tie it off with 3 proprietary patented knots. The sales pitch was legendary. First knot gives you a little puff, my friend. The second knot, a strong gale. The third knot summons a hurricane that will personally send you to meet your maker, so don't touch it. So some poor sap buys this premium, artisanal air for a week's pay. Then, months later, becalmed and desperate, he opens it and gets a sad, anticlimactic pfft. He just got rugged by the world's first airtrepreneur. 3. On a ship where water was strictly for drinking or making rum slightly less flammable, all other cleaning tasks required a different approach. They used the ship's own renewable, organic, crowd-sourced resource, piss. I'm not joking. They had a giant communal idea barrel on deck where everyone made a contribution. This wasn't just some fringe biohack. This was the official shipboard solution for everything. Need to disinfect a wound that's turning green? Pee on it. But its most glorious use was as the ship's high-efficiency laundry system. The officers' pristine white shirts were soaked in this vat of fermented human lemonade to achieve that aggressively white look. So when you see a captain looking regal, just know his collar smells vaguely of asparagus and regret. 4. Sailors didn't have much faith in God, but they had immense faith in finding bugs in his system. Their favorite life hack was tattooing a pig on one foot and a rooster on the other. The logic was so galaxy-brained it's almost admirable. They figured that since pigs and roosters are famously terrible swimmers, if the sailor fell overboard, God would be up there managing the universe and suddenly do a double take. Hold the phone. Is that a chicken? Drowning? My code doesn't allow for this. And in that moment of divine blue screen of death, God would have no choice but to reach down and scoop the sailor to safety to prevent a system crash. It was less an act of faith and more an attempt to file a technical support ticket with the Almighty. 5. The primary food item on board was called hardtac. Calling it food is a stretch. It was more like a geological specimen that happened to be made of flour. It was baked until it had the density of a bowling ball and the flavor of a dusty shelf. Biting into it was a great way to trade your teeth for a lifetime of soft food. So the only way to consume this culinary brick was to either pulverize it with a cannonball or let it marinate in rum until it became a sort of alcoholic gravel. And the best part? Each biscuit came with its own live-in tenants, a thriving community of weevils and maggots. These weren't bugs, they were squirming sprinkles. The official naval guidance was to just eat in the dark. What you can't see can't emotionally scar you. 6. You'd think the scariest thing at sea would be a kraken or a ghost ship. You'd be wrong. The single most terrifying object in the universe to a sailor was a banana. Bringing a banana on a ship was worse than bringing your mother-in-law. It was a guaranteed fast-track ticket to doom. The legends were specific. A ship with bananas would repel fish, its wood would rot faster, and the ship itself might just get depressed and sink out of sheer shame. While scientists might mumble something about ethylene gas, sailors knew the truth. The banana was a sentient, yellow agent of chaos, a fruit-shaped demon that actively wanted to watch them drown. They'd sooner have a live tiger on board than a single banana. 7. If you got injured at sea, your doctor was the ship's barber. And his medical philosophy was simple. Is that limb bothering you? Let's make it someone else's problem. This guy's medical kit was basically a toolbox, and his favorite prescription was a good, old-fashioned amputation via a saw that he probably used to build his own workbench. Anesthesia was for rich people on land. Your painkiller was a shot of rum and biting on a leather wallet until you passed out. While 4 dudes sat on you, this guy, with all the surgical precision of a blindfolded lumberjack, would perform what was less a medical procedure and more an act of frantic, violent carpentry. His Yelp review would be, 1 star, came in with a splinter, left with a stump, did not offer a lollipop. 8. When you're trapped on a wooden plank in the middle of nowhere for months, your standards for entertainment drop fast. So what did they do? They held the most prestigious and disgusting sporting event known to man, cockroach racing. The ship was basically a moving cockroach apartment complex, so they had an infinite supply of athletes. Sailors would capture the beefiest, most athletic-looking roaches from the bilge, give them epic names like Usain Bolt's Nightmare or Sir Reginald Scuttles, and place them in a chalk circle. Then, grown men would scream, cry, and bet their last possessions on which bug could run in a semi-straight line the fastest. This was their Super Bowl. It was a pathetic, glorious, and deeply unhygienic spectacle that proves boredom is the mother of all terrible ideas. 9. Let's discuss workplace disciplinary action. You get a bad performance review, maybe a stern email from HR. A sailor screws up? He gets subjected to a little something called keelhauling, which is the most terrifyingly polite name for what is essentially a high-speed underwater mauling. The concept was simple. Tie a man to a rope, throw him off one side of the ship, and drag his body along the entire submerged hull to the other. Now, the bottom of a ship wasn't smooth like a baby's bottom. It was a jagged, razor-sharp metropolis of barnacles, splinters, and ancient sea grime. It was less of a punishment and more of a forced tour of a coral reef made of tetanus and pain. The sailor faced a fun choice: die by drowning immediately, or die a bit later from 1,000 infected gashes after being turned into human sashimi. Keel hauling wasn't a deterrent. It was the HR department's most creative and final solution. 10. Let's peel back another layer of the grim reality of sailor life. Specifically, the layer right under their pants. What did they wear for underwear? The answer is a resounding, deafening, and profoundly uncomfortable nothing. Their only layer was a pair of trousers made from tar-stiffened canvas that had the texture and breathability of a gravel driveway. This garment was never washed. It simply evolved, absorbing months of sweat, seawater, spilled food, and questionable life choices until it could stand up on its own. The resulting chafing wasn't just an annoyance. It was a constant, raging fire in a place you can't scratch in public. The aroma that emanated from this situation was probably powerful enough to be classified as a chemical weapon. These weren't pants. They were a living, breathing historical document of suffering. 11. Sailors were convinced they had a direct line to the weather gods, but the operating manual was written by a madman. Rule number 1, whistling was strictly forbidden. To a sailor, a jaunty tune wasn't a sign of happiness. It was a personal engraved invitation sent directly to a Category 5 hurricane, asking it to come over and ruin everyone's day. It was the ultimate social taboo. But what if they were stuck with no wind? Did they have a logical solution? Of course not. They would go to the mainmast and begin scratching it, like a household cat trying to get your attention. Grown, grizzled men, who wrestled with storms and fought pirates, would stand there, delicately scraping a giant wooden pole with their fingernails, believing this would summon a gentle breeze. It was the maritime equivalent of trying to fix your Wi-Fi by whispering sweet nothings to the router. 12. After months at sea, when the hardtack was more weevil than biscuit, the menu got creative. The ship's most abundant and reliable source of fresh protein began to look appealing: the rats. But this wasn't just a desperate act of starvation. It evolved into a full-blown culinary subculture. These weren't just rats, they were bilge pigs, or long-tailed chickens. A black market emerged where a plump, well-fed specimen could be sold for a small fortune. You can just imagine the conversations. Look at the marbling on that one. He's been feasting on the captain's spilled rum, a truly premium vintage. It represents a complete psychological breakdown. The moment your brain looks at a furry harbinger of disease scurrying through filth and thinks, you know, with a little garlic and butter, that would be delicious. 13. In the grand contest of looking effortlessly cool while doing something incredibly stupid, sailors were undisputed world champions. Their favorite power move involved lighting their clay pipes. In the wind and spray, keeping a flame alive was tough. Their solution? Just hold the burning coal or ember right up to the pipe bowl, which was conveniently located directly beneath their enormous, magnificent, and highly flammable mustaches. Inevitably, the mustache would catch fire. A normal human would react with panic. A sailor? He'd calmly take a deep, contemplative puff, letting the smoldering whiskers fill the air with the scent of burnt hair and victory, all while giving his crewmates a look that said, "Yes, my face is on fire. It's how I keep warm. You wouldn't understand." It was toxic masculinity at its most flammable. 14. Sourcing fresh water was the ultimate challenge, and it led to some truly galaxy-brained inventions. One leading theory, proposed by some forgotten maritime genius, was to desalinate seawater using a sheep. Well, part of a sheep. The technology involved taking a massive fleece of wool, dunking it into the ocean, and then having several men nearly break their backs hauling the now insanely heavy, dripping mess back onto the deck. Then they would wring it out, operating under the deeply flawed assumption that the wool would magically trap the salt. The result of all this Herculean effort? A tiny trickle of water that was still salty, but now also tasted, powerfully and unforgettably, of wet sheep. They didn't invent a desalination machine. They invented a labor-intensive device for making the world's most disgusting beverage. 15. The punishment for public drunkenness wasn't a fine or a night in the brig. It was a forced entry into the world of high-fashion humiliation. The offender was sentenced to wear the drunkard's cloak, which was just a standard wooden barrel with holes cut out for his head and arms. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. You became a walking, waddling monument to your own bad decisions. Every simple task became a slapstick comedy routine. Can't sit down, can't bend over, can't fit through a door. You were a human wine cask, forced to marinate in your own shame while your crewmates pointed and laughed. It was the 17th century equivalent of having a viral video of you falling down the stairs, except the video followed you around for 24 hours. 16. The salted beef on board was so far removed from actual food that it transcended into a new category of matter. It was a reddish-brown mineral, preserved with so much salt that it became harder than oak and about as appetizing. Trying to chew it would result in a broken jaw and a profound sense of despair. So, since it was completely useless as a source of nutrition, the sailors found a better use for it: arts and crafts. During the endless hours of boredom, they would take out their knives and carve this fossilized meat into things they actually needed, like buttons, chess pieces, or little figurines of their loved ones. It is the only food in human history where its primary value was not in being eaten, but in being repurposed as a building material. That's a lovely belt buckle, John. Thanks, it used to be my dinner. 17. You would think that for a group of men whose job was to fight the ocean itself, their biggest fears would be, giant waves or sea monsters. Nope. Their kryptonite was gingers. I am not kidding. A sailor could be on a ship held together with duct tape and hope, with a captain who navigated using a half-eaten sandwich, and he'd be fine. But if he saw a red-haired person on his way to the port, it was a full-blown Code Red DEFCON 1 disaster. The entire voyage would be in jeopardy. It was the ultimate bad omen, as if that person's fiery hair was a personal invitation for Satan to come and personally sink their ship. It's like believing that seeing a guy in a yellow shirt causes flat tires. It's a level of nonsensical, laser-focused bigotry that is so specific and so stupid, it's almost a form of art. 18. Every job has that one task nobody wants to do. For sailors, that task was cleaning the bilge, which wasn't so much a task as it was a descent into the seventh circle of hell with a bucket. The bilge was the ship's septic tank, subconscious, and primordial soup all rolled into one. It was a thick, gag-inducing slurry of seawater, decade-old food chunks, rat poop, human poop, the ghosts of forgotten dreams, and probably at least one dead crew member nobody had noticed was missing. The smell wasn't just bad. It was a physical assault. It was an aroma so powerful it could probably melt steel. And some poor soul's job was to climb down into this abyss and scoop it out. It wasn't cleaning. It was an archaeological dig through a nightmare. You didn't get paid for it. You just lost a bet with God. 19. Picture this. It's freezing cold, you're soaked to the bone, and your feet feel like 2 blocks of ice. A normal person might wish for thicker socks. A sailor? He looks at the fish he just caught and has a moment of grotesque genius. He thinks, you know what? That thing's skin is basically a pre-made foot glove. So they would literally skin a cod or a herring and slide their bare feet into the cold, slimy, scaly tube. They called them socks. Let's just process the user experience. The initial clammy shock, the constant squelching sound with every step, and the smell. Dear God, the smell. After a long shift, peeling off those fish-skin socks would unleash a biohazard so potent it could be used to interrogate prisoners. It was less a piece of clothing and more a cry for help. 20. On a ship where human life was cheap and disposable, there was one being that was treated with the reverence of a king, the ship's cat. This wasn't a pet. This was a furry deity, a 4-legged god of rodent genocide. Its only job was to kill the rats that were trying to eat the ship and the food, making it more valuable than half the crew. Therefore, messing with the cat was the ultimate sin. Killing the ship's cat was seen as a personal insult to the sea itself, guaranteeing that a rogue wave would appear out of nowhere and drag you straight to Davy Jones's locker. A sailor would watch his best friend get washed overboard and just mutter, "Well, that's a shame." But if the cat sneezed, the entire crew would go into a panic, brewing it special tea and offering it their rum ration. 21. You've been gone for years, you've survived storms and scurvy, and now you're coming home. You have to bring back treasure to prove it was all worth it. But here's the problem. Most sailors had the geological expertise of a toddler. They'd be on some exotic island, see a shiny rock, and their brains would short-circuit. "Gold!" they'd scream, stuffing their pockets with pyrite, famously known as fool's gold. They would return to their home port, swaggering into the tavern, slapping their bag of worthless, sparkly rocks on the table, expecting everyone to be impressed. It was the 17th century equivalent of showing off your fake Rolex. These were men who could read the stars like a book, but would have traded their own mother for a piece of yellow gravel. 22. Being a ship's captain meant you were at the top of the food chain. You got the biggest cabin, the best food, and the privilege of slowly poisoning yourself with every single meal. While the plebs ate their rock-hard biscuits, the officers feasted from fancy pewter plates and drank from pewter goblets. The only tiny issue was that this luxury pewter was chock full of lead. So every swig of wine was a small dose of brain damage. This led to the classic symptoms of leadership: excruciating gout, unpredictable mood swings, and a level of paranoia that made them think the seagulls were spying on them. So, when your captain sentenced you to a flogging for sneezing too loud, he wasn't just a tyrant. He was a tyrant whose brain was being gently cooked by his own dinnerware. 23. On a ship where salted pork was a major food group, you'd think they'd be pretty comfortable with the word pig. You would be dead wrong. Saying the P word out loud was considered a direct challenge to the sea gods. It was like yelling bomb in an airport. They were literally eating the animal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But speaking its name was forbidden. This led to an absurd collection of code words. They'd call it the gentleman in the curly tail, or old long snout. It's an insane level of mental gymnastics. Imagine the cook yelling, "Lads, dinner's ready. Come and get your salted, that farm animal that isn't a sheep." It proves that you can be tough enough to survive a hurricane, but still be scared of a three-letter word. 24. The image of a tightly knit crew working in perfect harmony is a complete fantasy. A real ship's crew was a chaotic, dysfunctional mess that made the United Nations look organized. It was a random grab bag of people from every corner of Europe who had been tricked, kidnapped, or were just running from the law. You had a Spaniard who hated the Englishman, who couldn't understand the Dutchman, who thought the Portuguese guy was an idiot. The captain would scream an order in one language. It would get passed down through 3 more, and by the time it reached the sailor who was actually supposed to do the thing, the instruction was to go wrestle the anchor. It wasn't a crew, it was a floating linguistic disaster. It's not a miracle they crossed the ocean. It's a miracle they didn't sink in the harbor. 25. So, your ship has a problem. It's not just a few rats, it's a full-blown, 6-legged, 8-legged, and furry-legged infestation. The vessel is more bug than wood. What's the solution? Do you set traps? Use poison? No, that's for logical people on land. The sailor's solution was far more dramatic. You sink your own ship. On purpose. This genius move was called careening. They'd sail to a shallow bay, tip the entire ship on its side until the keel was out of the water and just let it flood. The theory was that all the rats, cockroaches, and other uninvited tenants would have a moment of panic and flee the sinking vessel for dry land. It was the ultimate scorched earth policy for pest control. It's like finding a spider in your house and deciding the only logical response is to burn the whole house to the ground. 26. You'd think the most important qualification for a ship's cook would be, the ability to cook. You'd be wrong. The number 1 desired trait was having only 1 leg. I'm dead serious. The galley cook was almost always a grizzled veteran who had lost a leg in a previous misadventure. The logic behind this bizarre hiring practice was that a man with 1 leg and a wooden peg leg could brace himself more effectively against the violent rocking of the ship. He could jam his peg leg into a crack in the floorboards and become a stable, human tripod of culinary mediocrity. It didn't matter if he routinely burned water or thought salt was a spice for everything. As long as he could stay upright while stirring the questionable stew, he was the best man for the job. 27. Sailors had a very complicated relationship with the calendar. They were obsessed with lucky and unlucky days, and the unluckiest day of all was Friday. It was the cursed day, the day you didn't talk about. Starting a voyage on a Friday was considered so catastrophically stupid that it was basically maritime suicide. It didn't matter if the winds were perfect, the crew was ready, and the tide was ideal. A good captain would sit in port, burning through supplies and money, just to avoid leaving on a Friday. They would literally stare at perfect sailing conditions and say, "Nope, can't do it. The day of the week is wrong." It's the kind of logic that makes you wonder how they ever managed to figure out which end of the boat was the front. 28. Oral hygiene at sea was creative and deeply concerning. There were no toothbrushes or minty, fresh toothpaste. A sailor's dental kit consisted of 2 items: a piece of old, grimy sailcloth and a pinch of gunpowder. The process was simple. You dip the ragged cloth into the gunpowder and then scrub your teeth with all the enthusiasm of a man trying to sandblast a wall. Gunpowder is abrasive, sure, so it probably removed some of the plaque. But it's also, gunpowder. It's a delightful mix of sulfur, charcoal, and potassium nitrate. So not only were you scraping your enamel into oblivion, but you were also giving your gums a nice chemical burn. The result was a smile that was less pearly white and more recently survived a small explosion. 29. Of all the things to be scared of at sea, nothing terrified sailors more than the legend of the Flying Dutchman. This wasn't just a ghost story told around the campfire. It was an accepted reality. They genuinely believed there was a cursed ghost ship out there, doomed to sail the oceans forever, and that seeing it was the ultimate omen of death. It was the maritime equivalent of seeing the Grim Reaper himself wave at you from across the street. If a lookout spotted its spectral sails on the horizon, the mood on the ship would instantly shift from boredom to pure, pants-wetting terror. It was the ultimate check engine light for your soul. Forget pirates and storms. The real threat was a spooky, ethereal sailboat that probably didn't even exist. 30. Words have power, especially when you're a deeply superstitious man floating on a piece of wood in the middle of a hostile ocean. The single most forbidden word on any ship was drown. You did not say it, ever. It was like summoning Beetlejuice, but instead of a funny ghost, you got a one-way trip to the bottom of the sea. Instead, they had a whole library of creative, folksy euphemisms. The most famous was going to Davy Jones's locker, which sounds more like visiting a quirky antique shop than dying a horrible, watery death. It was a complete refusal to acknowledge the most obvious danger of their profession. They were literally surrounded by the thing that could kill them at any moment, but they couldn't bring themselves to name it. 31. Let's talk about the single most important fluid on any ship. It wasn't water, it wasn't coffee, it was rum. Alcoholism wasn't a problem for sailors, it was a professional requirement. The daily rum ration, known as grog, wasn't a treat. It was a fundamental part of their compensation package and their sanity. A sober sailor was a weird, suspicious anomaly. The default state for most of the crew was somewhere between pleasantly buzzed and seeing sounds. This made perfect sense, because you'd have to be at least partially drunk to accept a job with a high probability of death by scurvy, falling, or being eaten by your own food. Rum wasn't just a drink. It was the engine oil that kept the entire miserable, creaking enterprise of the Age of Discovery running. 32. The ship's chickens were a vital source of fresh eggs, a rare luxury at sea. So, when a chicken got sick, it was a serious problem. How did they treat it? With the same medical expertise they applied to themselves. They gave it rum. If a hen looked a bit droopy or wasn't laying, the cure was to force-feed it a bit of grog. The logic was flawless. If alcohol makes a human sailor feel better, or at least forget he feels bad, then it must work on a chicken. So you'd have these poor birds, already suffering from some avian ailment, now also dealing with a crippling hangover. It's a perfect snapshot of sailor problem solving. When in doubt, add rum. It doesn't matter if the problem is a person, an animal, or a leaky barrel. The answer is always rum. 33. And now, for the grand finale of medical malpractice, I give you the tobacco smoke enema. I wish I were making this up. Standard issue on many ships was a kit designed to blow tobacco smoke directly into a man's rectum. This was considered a cutting-edge resuscitation technique, especially for drowning victims. The theory was that the warm, stimulating smoke would… well, nobody was entirely sure, but they thought it would revive the person from the inside out. So imagine you've just been pulled, half dead, from the freezing ocean. You're gasping for air, and the first thing you see is the ship's surgeon approaching you with a bellows, a pipe, and a wild look in his eyes. It wasn't just a bad medical idea. It was a profound violation of personal space and common sense. It was the dumbest idea in a long list of dumb ideas. The undisputed king of what were they thinking? And there you go. Proof that the so-called masters of the sea were also masters of superstition, bad hygiene, and the art of making everything 10 times dumber. Which of these ridiculous sailor traditions would you actually try? And which one made you lose faith in humanity entirely? Tell me your pick in the comments. I read every single one. And if you love stories that make you laugh, cringe, and wonder how humanity even survived, smash that like button and subscribe right now. Don't just sail away and stick around. We've got even weirder history coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's next.